Brighton's finest. Juice.
I'm here with David Shrigley, who's the guest director for this year's Brighton Festival 2018. Starts on the 5th of May, goes on to the 27th of May. And quite appropriately, you live in Brighton now, don't you?
I do. It's very handy for me.
Yeah. So you've got no excuses.
I've got no excuses. No excuses for being late. No excuses for not showing up.
But you were almost late this morning, weren't you? You told me off air, if you don't mind me saying.
I was a bit late, yeah. But, if anybody can be late, it's me, right?
Of course, yeah. You can be late to your own party, can't you?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so for those who don't know much about you, you're an artist, an illustrator. You've worked for various publications, including The Guardian. You've released spoken word recordings. Had exhibitions as well. Can you tell me about what was the process of you getting involved with this festival this year?
Well, I moved to Brighton in 2015, and my one friend that I had who lived in Brighton at that time, Craig Melvin, who's a writer, amongst other things, we went to see some stuff in the festival, and it was like, wow, Brighton Festival's pretty cool, isn't it? It's great. And Craig said, I know the director of Brighton Festival, maybe you could be the guest director. And I sort of said, well, I'd like to do that, but do you think they'd really want me to be the guest director? And it's like, no, they would. So they asked me, and here we are. So very flattering to be asked, given that the last guest directors were Kate Tempest, Ali Smith, Laurie Anderson, Brian Eno, Anish Kapoor, a list of very impressive names, which I'm humbled to be added to.
So how long have you been in Brighton now?
Just over 2 years.
Okay, and what's apart from being involved in the festival, what is your impressions of Brighton as a place to live and work as well?
Well, I used to live in Glasgow for many, many years, and my wife and I fancied a change. We both have the flexibility to go somewhere else. So Brighton was a place that I chose to move to. I didn't move here for love or for work or for other circumstances. It's a town that I've always really loved. And my sister used to live here in the 90s, and when I came down from Glasgow to do things in London, I would always stay in Brighton with her. And I guess it always felt like my kind of town.
So I was just doing some quick research on you, because I must admit I wasn't that familiar with you or your background, but you were in Glasgow for a long time, weren't you? Because you went to college there, you went to university there.
Yeah.
And you did an art course at the Glasgow School of Art, and you got a 2-2, which is something to be proud of.
Yes, yeah. It's getting a 2-2 in fine art is a bit like it's the degree you get for turning up, basically.
Because I think you say that people didn't really understand what your work was about, because it's not art in the traditional sense, is it? It's this. I think you said it at the launch earlier on. It's something that people can do. Basically, you don't have to have immense craft skills to do what you do. It's just more the content and what you're trying to say that is the most important bit.
Yeah, but I don't demonstrate a lot of craft skills in my work, which for some people is problematic, but doesn't necessarily set it apart from the rest of contemporary art in versus conceptual art, etc. But the thing that people have a problem with most is perhaps that it's very comic. It's unashamedly comedy, I suppose, infuses a lot of what I do. And it seems that in the world of fine art, comedy is problematic for people. But as I've made a career of it, and that's become my niche, I suppose. And I'm not taken seriously by a lot of people in the art world, but I make a living and I get to do what I want to do, and so I don't care at this stage in my life.
No, and why should you? You're the guest director of the Brighton Festival.
I know,
and
that's awesome.
having a 2-2 is it's brilliant because look where you are now.
Wow.
Didn't make any difference, basically.
No, well, my wife has an MFA, a Masters of Fine Art, and then I was given an honorary doctorate by De Montfort University in Leicester, which is the town where I grew up a few years ago. So she was really miffed. So I actually have effectively a PhD now, albeit they just gave it to me. Yeah. I didn't have to do anything.
So just before we get on to the music side, because that's what really interests us here at Brighton's Finest, your art, I've read somewhere that there's a sort of subversive quality to it. You kind of try and subvert traditional notions of art and what it is and how it's portrayed and to the public and the media. Can you expand on that at all?
I guess my work is quite anarchic, albeit, and rebellious in a way, albeit I'm a middle-aged man now.
It's never too late to be rebellious.
No, I mean,
I know.
I guess, I'm not, I guess if people tell you you're not allowed to do something, that's exactly what you want to do, and that's the way I've always seen my work. And the content of the work is, it's quite a mordant sense of humour. It's quite difficult and dark, albeit there's a lot, it has a certain joyful nonsense to it. It's there are certain moments where it is quite dark. It's about deviance and death and difficult subjects.
All D's. All subjects close to my heart.
Yeah. And my name's David, so there you are.
Brilliant. Okay, so music, because you're very interested in music, and you've been involved in the world of music. You've directed a video for Blur, good song. Also Bonnie Prince Billy, who's a favourite artist of mine. Agnes, Queen of Sorrow, I think, was the one you did. And you were involved in a project called Worried Noodles, which was musicians interpreting your writings and lyrics, including David Byrne, Hot Chip, and Franz Ferdinand. Also Liars and Grizzly Bear as well. That sounded like a really amazing project to be involved with.
Yeah, music is a big part of my life. Big part of my social life, going to see bands. I used to be in a band.
Who were they?
Who was my...
Do we know them?
Fortunately not, no. My ambition was really just to learn to play the guitar and to stand up and play guitar and sing at the same time in a band. That was my ambition, and once I'd achieved that, I guess I lost interest in being in a band. But strangely, years later, I because I've always let it be known that I'm a big music fan, I've designed record covers for lots of different bands, and then eventually I ended up, a record label asked me to write, to make a cover for one of their bands. And I never got around to it. And they said, maybe we could do a record cover that was like an artwork and it didn't have a record in it. So I liked that idea. But it sort of didn't seem like quite enough to be a product that people would want to have. So I made a songbook to go in it. So it was sort of like, kind of like the handwritten lyrics that you get in sort of sleeve notes kind of thing. So it was a book, and then there was an empty record, an empty sleeve that went in it with sort of an apology for there not being a vinyl record in there. So it's kind of an odd, conceptual, funny publication, really, but it was put out by a record label, and then that sort of went quite well. And I guess inevitably, the label then said, why don't we give the book to people and they can just interpret your lyrics and make them into songs? So it wasn't really my idea, but in retrospect, it was sort of inevitable that it might happen. So that's where Worried Noodles came from, and it ended up being this really peculiar collection of pop music, essentially. Yeah. I didn't choose many of the bands. I called in a few favours because I sort of am acquainted with Franz Ferdinand and David Byrne, but the rest, majority of the bands on it, I hadn't heard of at the time. So, Liars being one, Grizzly Bear, who I sort of knew about at the time, but I would have never thought to ask them. If I'd have curated the thing, it would have been like Japanese noise music or something, like the Boredoms and Keiji Haino, because that's what I was listening to at the time. So it's probably just as well that it was very much a collaboration with the label. And I made a spoken word record, which again sort of came about by accident, where I was invited to do a project to write something for somebody to perform, and then I didn't have time to get anybody to perform it, so I performed it myself, and then that sort of led to doing more stuff like that, and they put out an album which was my voice, my words, but then a lot of other actors that I got into it doing it, and then I've subsequently made more spoken word stuff, but more with actors, because I started to work with actors with performance and animation and stuff, and then done this bizarre opera project in 2011 with a guy called Dave Fennessy, who's a youngish composer, really interesting angular compositions. So that was a really peculiar thing, writing the libretto to an opera, which is something that I never thought I'd do in my life, but there it is. And here we are now in 2018. I'm making another musical theatre project with some local musicians in Brighton, which I'm really looking forward to. And I've been making musical instruments, making electric guitars for them to play. So that's don't really know why I'm doing it, but they only sort of make sense once you give them to somebody to play as sculptural works, which is what I'm supposed to make because I'm an artist and have exhibitions. There's something about guitars that I've always loved, which you may be familiar with, where the guitar as an object, it's sort of somehow a bit more than a tool for making music. It has a presence and a desirability in its own right. So I made this series of guitars that are called problem guitars, and they're called problem guitars because a lot of them only have one string and the fret's in the wrong place.
Yeah. We can make great music with one string. I think C6 Steve makes a living out of it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I guess there are, you only need one string and one finger.
I was listening to the B-52s recently, and I didn't realise that the original guitars played with just 4 strings. Did you know that? 4 strings out of 6 on an electric guitar. He took the middle 2 strings out, so he had the top 2 and the bottom 2.
I didn't know. I guess there's quite a lot of precedent for it back then and now as well. Like the guy Ruins, who you may be familiar with, the band from Japan, Yoshida Tatsuya. He plays with people who generally have one string or 2 strings, like an A string on the bass and a top E string, and I think Lightning Bolt, I don't know if they're still around, but they that guy also had a sort of one bass string and one guitar string as well. It's all about the effects and the attitude, isn't it?
Brighton's finest. Juice.